Hello everyone. In this video I explain the benchmark rotation of condition dueling Virtuoso. I do this in 3 steps. The first step is a basic introduction to all the traits and skills we have. The second step outlines the basic rotation idea, and the third step takes a look at all the details that maximize the golem DPS. Step 1. We open the benchmark with a phantasmal swordsman. The trait Sharper Images says, whenever an illusion lands a critical hit, it causes 1 stack of bleeding. We do not have clones as Virtuoso, but phantasms are also illusions. Notice that the trait has no cooldown. It will trigger for every single hit of the phantasm. Phantasmal Swordsman hits 9 times, causing 9 stacks of bleeding. And Phantasmal Warden hits 12 times, causing 12 stacks of bleeding. This is the reason why we don't use more traditional condition-based offhand weapons. The Torch Phantasm, for example, only hits once, so it does significantly less damage despite its respectable burning output. After the Phantasms complete their attacks, they despawn and transform into a blade. When despawning, they do 1 final attack from the trait Phantasmal Blade. This trait does not trigger Sharper Images, because it counts as you, the player, hitting and not the phantasm. Outside of phantasms, the trait Jagged Mind is really what we care about. It is a version of Sharper Images, this time for the player. All skills which have the attribute Blade will trigger it. The skills in this build with that attribute are all 4 of our Blade Songs, Flying Cutter, Blade Call, Unstable Bladestorm, 1000 Cuts, and finally the aforementioned trait Phantasmal Blades. Just like Sharper Images, the trait Jagged Mind triggers on a per hit basis. 1000 Cuts with its 10 hits will cause 10 stacks of bleeding. Bladesong Harmony with 5 stocked blades causes 5 stacks of bleeding. Speaking of blade songs, the trait Maim the Disillusioned causes 1 stack of torment per blade, which adds up to 5 stacks of torment on a single Bladesong harmony. Let us briefly mention Bladesong Dissonance. This skill combines your blades into 1, and consequently triggers Jagged Mind and Maim the Disillusions only once, making it rather lackluster in comparison to every other Bladesong. Having used our 5 blades on Bladesong Harmony, begs the question how to refill our blades again. There are 3 ways. When a phantasm finishes its attack, it turns itself into a blade. Secondly, our Dagger 2, Blade Call, explicitly says it stocks 1 blade when hitting. This is for the entire skill cast, not for each of its 6 hits, so we will get 1 blade from the Dagger 2, but not 6 of them. And finally, the Grandmaster trait Bloodsong. Not only does it increase our outgoing bleeding damage by 25%, no, it also gives us a blade for every 5 stacks of bleeding we apply. A small note on our auto attack. The normal auto hit is just a single blade attack, but every 3rd auto attack, and there's a 5-second grace period, you do not need to worry about finishing a particular chain, it will just continue counting after you interrupted it with a skill. Every 3rd auto attack triggers another flurry of 3 extra blade attacks, causing it to produce 4 stacks of bleeding instead of 1. So we can say that on average auto attacks cause about 2 stacks of bleeding. Let us now combine all the traits we have and take a look at this table for blade and bleeding generation. The normal auto hit does just 1 bleed and gives a 1/5 of a blade. The 3rd auto hit does 4 bleeds and gives 0.8 blades. An averaged out auto hit, as a consequence, gives 2 stacks of bleed and 0.4 blades. Our Dagger 2 Blade Call hits 6 times, so it does 6 bleeds, and it gives 2.2 blades, 1 for the guaranteed hit and 1.2 from the trait Bloodsong. Phantasmal Swordsman in total does 10 bleed stacks and produces 3 blades. Phantasmal Warden with its 13 bleed stacks does 3.6 blades. 1000 cuts, including the 6th rune bonus of the trait rune which gives an additional bleed, does 11 bleed stacks and 2.2 blades. Bladesong Harmony, Sorrow and Requiem all do 5 bleed and 1 blade. Bladesong Dissonance does 1 bleed and 0.2 blades. And finally, our Sigil, Superior Sigil of Earth, causes 1 bleed every crit with a 2-second cooldown, and therefore adds 0.2 blades every roughly 2.2 or 2.3 seconds. As you can see, all of our skills, including the skills that spend blades, will actually generate blades. This is very useful because it gives us, in practice, an almost infinite supply of blades. The trait Deadly Blades profits from this. Whenever we use a blade song, the damage for the next 5 seconds is increased by 5%. By having access to so many blade song users, we can nearly permanently maintain this buff. In the video you are about to see, we keep a 97.5% uptime on Deadly Blades. There are 2 more skills that need mentioning: Signet of the Ether and Signet of Illusions. Using Signet of the Ether resets the cooldown on Phantasmal Swordsman and Phantasmal Warden, which allows us to cast our strongest Phantasm, which is going to be Phantasmal Warden, twice in a row. Signet of Illusions, on the other hand, resets all our blade songs, allowing us to double up on all the shatters for a high condition burst. Since Bladesong Harmony is a skill with 2 charges of ammunition, the Signet of Illusions will only refresh one of the charges, not both. In this part of the video, I will show you the basic idea behind the condition Virtuoso rotation. The first skill we are going to use is our Phantasmal Swordsman. As you know from before, Phantasmal Swordsman provides 10 stacks of bleeding by spawning a Phantasm that attacks 9 times and then summoning Phantasmal Blade from our traits, which is an additional blade attack, and which then causes bleeding through Jagged Mind. And it will stock some blades for us, 3 in total, so it's a very good first skill to cast. Now, Phantasmal Swordsman has a roughly 10-second cooldown with Alacrity, which means that for the next 10 seconds, the sword weapon set does not offer any interesting skills, because everything we could do here, we can also do on the focus set. That is why the next thing we're going to do is we're going to weapon swap to the focus set. On the focus set, the first thing you immediately see is that we have used our elite skill, 1000 Cuts. 1000 Cuts has no cast animation, so it can be used during any skill you choose. And we want to use it as early as possible, because that means it's going to come up 3 times in the benchmark. If we waited 10 more seconds or so, we couldn't get it into the benchmark more often. So that's why we use it immediately. The next skill we're going to press is Bladesong Harmony. Now, the advantage of this is that we are going to spend our blades, so our blade generation can start working. And the second thing is we are getting the buff Deadly Blades up, which is a 5% modifier to our damage output. So it makes sense to use as a second skill here. And it is going to be immediately followed up by a Blade Call, our Dagger 2. You can see that I'm already spamming the Dagger 2 in order to have no delay between the 2 skills. So Dagger 2 is about to be cast, and this is then followed up by a Dagger 3, Unstable Bladestorm, which will also then passively work on adding bleeding stacks and will generate more blades. As you can see, our goal is now to get to 5 blades again, and we only need a tiny bit of delay to achieve that. which is why after the Unstable Blade Storm, we will follow it up with a Focus 5, a Phantasmal Warden, and this should give us enough time to refill the blades to follow up with a Bladesong Sorrow, our F2. And you can see we are during the cast of Phantasmal Warden, and I'm already spamming the input on our Bladesong Sorrow. Even though we are only at 4 blades, I just know there's going to be a 5th blade at the time we are done with everything. So we were able to shatter it with 5 blades. Now with all these skills on cooldown, it's a good time to use Signet of the Ether to reset our Phantasmal Warden. And after having reset it, we immediately cast it again. There's no reason to wait because nothing else is ready. And after that, we were able to follow up with another Bladesong Harmony, our F1. And now with our shatters all on cooldown, our important shatters, that is this, we can use our Signet of Illusions to reset the shatters. This will gain us a full recharge on our F2 and 1 charge of F1. And since we don't have 3 blades yet, or since we don't have 5 blades yet, we are missing 3. This is an extra time to use our Blade Call again. So Blade Call, as we remember, gives us 2 to 3 blades pretty much immediately. And with this Blade Call out, we now have 5 blades for our F2 again. And this is the first time where we're actually using an auto hit. So a lot of people, when they struggle with reaching good damage numbers on Condition Virtuoso, the problem is that they are way too slow with their opening. And what they should do instead is make sure to queue up all the skills perfectly, so no blade auto attacks slip into the opener. As you can see, until here, it was not correct to have any... it would not have been correct to have any auto attacks. Until here, we just used our skills immediately. Because our skills are way stronger than our auto attacks. Even though the auto attack will be around 18k DPS if you just run auto attacks, our skills are much better than that. We want to go for 37k DPS, so it makes sense to prioritize the skills. But now we will auto attack until we have 5 blades again. And then we use our F1. We can use our Dagger 2 and our Dagger 3. And then we swap back to the sword set. Now, around 12 seconds ago, we were casting this Phantasmal Swordsman and it's now up again. And now we spend 10 seconds on this sword set. What we do here is pretty standard. We use our F1 again, and then we get another 5 blades. Can use our F4, because we had 5 blades. It is important that you let your F4 channel to completion. There's not much you can do to interrupt it, but if you pressed sword 4 here, for example, you would interrupt this cast, or if you dodge rolled, you interrupt it as well. It's important to let it run to completion, otherwise it doesn't do anything. And after this it's just auto attacks, another Dagger 2, F2, and now is another crucial moment. Our Unstable Blade Storm is ready, and after that we are going to use our Sword 5. So, as you can see on the sword set, we used our Sword 5 as the first skill, and we are going to use it as the last skill. And the reason to make it the first and the last skill is to, number one, minimize the amount of time spent on the sword set, because we want to get back to our Focus Phantasm, which is ready again. And the second thing is, if we delay the swap by more after casting the second Sword 5, this means the Sword 5 will come up during our time on the Focus set. which then costs us a sword 5 cost. Because as I said, it's around the 10-second cooldown, so the optimal thing to do is to cast it, get off the weapon set, and come back in 10 seconds when it's just ready again. So that's like the optimized use of our sword 5. So we use it here, and we swap back to focus immediately. Here on the focus set there's pretty standard stuff. We reset our focus phantasm because it's so strong, and we go back to the sword set. And now we just rotate through our shatters, our skills, and as you can see we don't use our F3 at all, even though it would be ready here. The reason for that is that the F3 does only add as much DPS as an averaged out auto attack. So like an auto chain does the same DPS contribution as F3. So we would use this cooldown and we would risk interrupting an auto attack with it for no benefit whatsoever. So we don't press it here. The only times we are going to press it is when we want to maintain the Deadly Blades trait buff. So as you remember, whenever we use a blade song, we get 5 seconds of a damage buff, and if that threatens to run out and we don't have any other blade songs to refresh it, we are going to use our F3 instead. But other than that, it's just the same damage as an auto attack, and you shouldn't use it. So then comes a sword 5, and after this sword 5 you will weapon swap again. And we use some more of our blade songs. And now something very interesting happens while we refresh our focus 5 with our Signet of the Ether. Something very interesting is going to happen here. Our Signet of Illusions is coming off cooldown now. There are two disadvantages to this. If we use it now, we of course would get a reset on these two skills, right? But our F2 has been on cooldown for quite a while already. We are not getting a full reset out of it. We would get a middle reset out of it because we're reducing the cooldown from 11 to 0 seconds rather than reducing it from, let's say, 16 to 0 seconds, which would be way more optimal. So resetting Signet of Illusion here, it can work, but it's not getting full value out of it. And the second problem here is our weapon swap is on a 2-second cooldown. If we go into Signet of Illusions next, we are actually going to delay our weapon swap here. This means that our sword 5 comes later. And as I said already, it's best to swap back after 10 seconds to get the maximum uses of sword 5 here. So maybe to sum it up, there's nothing very wrong about using Signet of Illusions here, but it's just not quite optimal, which is why we're not going to use it here. Instead, we use our Focus 5, and now is the only use of our Blade Song Dissonance, because we're going to need 5 seconds to cast the next Blade Song. Now is a good moment to refresh Deadly Blades. Otherwise it would run out within the next 5 seconds. So we use Blade Song Dissonance, swap weapon, use our Phantasmal Swordsman. We use up all our shatters. And now we put the F2 on cooldown. And now is the best moment to use our Signet of Illusions, because all our shatters are going to be on cooldown. We still have some time until the weapon swap, and we don't weapon swap before casting the sword 5 anyway. So this time the Signet of Illusion introduces no delay into the rotation whatsoever. That's what we've been waiting for. So we Signet of Illusions here. And now it's a bit unfortunate, we don't have enough blades to immediately shatter. But this is just, we can't have everything. We deal with this loss instead of the other loss I've outlined earlier. So we swap off, we dagger 2 to get to 5 blades, then F2. Now I need some auto attacks, and now I can F1. And this is another unfortunate moment. Our F1 has been at 2 charges for quite a while. Letting F1 sit at 2 charges is a damage loss, but we can't do anything about that either. We wait until we have 5 blades, and now we use it. And the rest of the benchmark is basically using some more shatters. This is the last F4 we can get in. And now we finish off with dagger 2, dagger 3, and our phantasm skills. We used another F3 here, because otherwise we wouldn't have had time. We wouldn't have had the Deadly Blades buff. And now we just finish off with some more blades. And this results in almost 38,000 DPS. Let us now take a more detailed look at the rotation. This part of the video is for players who want to reach very high numbers on the golem. So it is not necessarily meant for players who are just starting out, but maybe you're interested as well in knowing about the rotation in some more detail. So keep watching if you want to. The first thing I want to point out is our Sword 5 opener. Now, there are 2 ways to go about it. The Sword 5, it is actually a 2-part attack. The first part is summoning the Phantasm, which you can see has already spawned. And the second part is our character doing a melee attack with the sword. And these happen one after the other. So first the Phantasm spawns, and then is a small delay, and then our physical strike happens. Now, there would be the following option. We could summon the Phantasm and then swap the weapon after the Phantasm spawn, but before our Sword 5 hits. This has the consequence that we do not actually enter combat, because the Phantasm hasn't hit yet, it still hasn't, and we haven't hit, and then the weapon swap cancels our physical hit, so we don't enter combat at all. We could then use our Bladesong Harmony, and the Bladesong Harmony would actually be the thing that triggers the combat for us. That means we enter combat about 0.6 seconds later, which then increases our golem performance. The reason I'm not going to do this here is that the physical hit of the Sword 5 gives us 8 might. In a raid, it would be very beneficial to let this physical hit come through, and only later in the fight you can cancel it if you want to. But to have initial 8 might is pretty good, because it is way faster than boon supports could buff you up with might. So that's why I'm using it on the golem here. Yes, I'm wasting 0.6 seconds. Yes, it costs me DPS, but I think it's better to stick with a rotation that I think is also suitable for a raid. Now, after having swapped the weapon, we use our 1000 cuts. An important thing here is the Crate rune, which gives 1 additional bleeding stack and 1 additional poison stack, and 1 torment stack. This has a 30-second cooldown, and this cooldown cannot be reset with the special action key in the golem area. That means whenever you restart a golem, you need to wait 30 seconds since the last 1000 cuts use, otherwise you won't have it for the next golem attempt. This makes it very annoying to go to the golem with it, but it's necessary if you want to have the full damage. Now, the first skill we're going to use is Bladesong Harmony. And this is a bit curious, because Bladesong Harmony has a longer cast time than Bladesong Sorrow. and it does a bit less damage because Blade Song Sorrow also does confusion. Quite a lot actually. But we're still using Blade Song Harmony. Why is that? Because we're going to reset Blade Song Harmony and Blade Song Sorrow with our Signet of Illusions in about 6 seconds or so. We're going to reset it. If we use Blade Song Sorrow first, we put it on cooldown first, which means by the time we reset it, it's on a 10-second cooldown or so. And we then reset it to 0. But if we use it later, it's going to be on a 14-second cooldown when we reset it, and it also gets reset to 0 seconds. So whether we use Blade Song Sorrow first or after a few seconds, it doesn't actually impact our damage output, because the Signet of Illusions, it's going to reset it at whatever cooldown it is. Blade Song Harmony, on the other hand, it does not work like this, because it has ammunition, it has 2 charges right now, and Signet of Illusions only resets one of them. And by putting it on cooldown sooner, we actually gain the time difference between the Blade Song Harmony use and the Blade Song Sorrow use if we've swapped it. So we gain 3 or 4 seconds of the cooldown of the F1 here. You'll see it again when we use Signet of Illusions. So, after Blade Song Harmony, we use Dagger 2, Dagger 3, and Phantasm Warden. And now is another thing. I have complete trust to have 5 blades here. And this happens 95%, 99% of the time that we actually have 5 blades here by the time our F2 goes through. Because it doesn't count when we start the cast, it consumes the blades slightly later. There's going to be 5 blades here. I'm pretty certain. So I use it here. Then I cast Signet of the Ether. And now I will follow it up with a Phantasm Warden to give us some more time. But now it's not 100% guaranteed to have 5 blades at our F1. I'm not entirely sure under which scenario it does or does not happen that we have 5 blades here. It is possible that it has to do with the Signet of Illusions passive, which gives us 1 blade every 10 seconds while it's not on cooldown. So if it randomly gives the blade at the right time, it's very consistent, and if it randomly doesn't, then it might happen that we only have a 4 blade F1. In practice, it could then be better to delay your F1 to get it with 5 blades, but here we're grinding for maximum damage on the golem, so we can just take the risk. And if it goes wrong, it goes wrong. We lose a bit of DPS. We can still rotation practice, but it's not going to be a new benchmark. In a real fight, however, this will never affect you, because at the start you don't have perfect quickness or something, so you're slower anyway, and which gives the phantasms enough time to do their magic and provide you with all the blades you need. So focus 5 into F1 here, in any case. And as you can see, we have 5 blades. Now Signet of Illusion. As I said, the only thing that would happen if we swap the order of F1 and F2 is that F2 would be on 11 seconds and F1 would be on 6 seconds cooldown, and this doesn't help the F2, but it hurts the F1, because the F1 will go from 4.7 seconds cooldown to 1 charge and 4.7 seconds cooldown on the second charge. So it's really resetting 1 full charge, and that's why the order of the F skills is that way in the opener. And it's funny because I put the rotation like that on Snowcrows, and this makes a lot of people assume that our F1 is somewhat stronger than our F2. It isn't. It's really about the Signet of Illusions use. And if you don't use Signet of Illusions because you have a different utility skill here, or you're not using it in that way due to boss phasing times or something, It would be more optimal to open up with your F2 because it's way stronger than your F1. Also because of the shorter cast time. It's way stronger. So F2. And now we are auto-attacking. One important thing about auto-attacks is they are fairly long with a 0.44 second cast time. And it is quite important to finish them. I have done some math on this, but for example, as a rule of thumb, if the auto-attack is like a quarter through, like if you spend 0.1 seconds on it already, it is often better to complete the full auto-attack and then use the skill, instead of interrupting the auto-attack with the skill. Now, as a new player learning the class, it's probably better to spam the skills, but if you want really the highest DPS numbers, you need to complete your auto-attacks. And the way I did it is I counted them, and I mapped out the auto-attacks, at least for the first minute of the golem, where I know exactly how many auto-attacks I need between which skills. So I don't need to guesstimate whether I should go for the skill now or wait another attack. I just know it. And here I know I need 5 auto-attacks before our next F1. So I count to 5 and then cast the F1. Now 2 auto-attacks to our F2, to our dagger 2, and then 2 more auto-attacks to our dagger 3. And this is something very funny. Everything in our mind tells us to already swap the weapon because it's been up for quite a while. But there's something very sneaky going on here. Our dagger 3 has a 12-second cooldown, and our sword 5 also has a 12-second cooldown. If we weapon swapped here and went into the sword 5 first, the dagger 3 would come after, and because its cooldown is the same as the sword 5, it will actually always come after the sword 5. So it would be the first skill we use on focus and the second skill we use on sword all the time. And now there's this thing that the sword 5 has a 1 second cooldown cast time, and the dagger 3 is only on a very short cast time. And by having the dagger 3 first here and the sword 5 second, the dagger 3 will slowly increase the gap between itself and the sword 5, because the sword 5 with its longer cast time has a longer effective cooldown in the end, and the dagger 3 has a shorter cooldown, so it comes earlier and earlier in each loop. You can see this. Right now it's dagger 3 into sword 5, but the next dagger 3 will be dagger 3, 1 auto hit, and then sword 5. I'll point it out once we get around. So dagger 3, weapon swap, sword 5. Now, I've talked about physical hit before, and yes, in the opener I used the physical hit just to make it realistic for raids and to get into combat, right? But here I actually don't care about the physical hit. This is in contrast to the power virtuoso, which wants the physical hit to happen because it's good damage there. For us it doesn't really do anything. It does like 1500 damage. It gives us 15 extra ferocity, which we also don't really care about. So we just don't need it. What we're going to do is, when this cast bar has fully filled up, right before it starts glowing, we will actually stow our weapon away to remove the rest of the cast. We don't need it. And already we spam F1. And so now our character has not cast the full sword 5, but the phantasm has spawned. This gains, in exchange, like this gains a fraction of a second only, but it is a gain, right? We gain some time here, we use our F1 earlier, our sword 5 went on cooldown a bit earlier. Now, we use 3 dagger auto attacks, and then we go into dagger 2. This was actually not the cleanest dagger 2 I've ever done. I think I've I've started the cast of a 4th dagger auto attack, but it is what it is here. And now we go in our dagger 4, in our F4. We need 6 more dagger auto attacks. Let's rewind a bit. And then we used our F2. And now, as you can see, there's already a distance between the dagger 3 and the sword 5 due to the cast time of the sword 5. And after this auto attack we go dagger 3, then we use another auto attack, and now sword 5. And here again we swap the weapon right when this is complete, but before our character can actually strike with a sword. This is to cancel the physical hit. This saves us a fraction of a second and lets us continue with the rotation a bit earlier. But the phantasm has spawned. We use focus 5 into dagger 2. And the reason we're using focus 5 here is I can't be really sure that our dagger 2 is ready at that moment. Sometimes, depending on the speed at which I stowed the sword 5s and the perfection of the rotation, sometimes it's ready, sometimes it's not. It's generally not a good idea to, it's not a good sign if it's ready, but here it would have been ready, I think. Anyway, we go focus 5 into dagger 2, into F1 before it reaches 2 charges. Now we have to attack 6 times in order to get our Signet of the Ether back. We use Signet of the Ether, and now I use dagger 2 first. That is because our Phantasmal Warden, it's not really about the Phantasmal Warden's cooldown, because the rotation loop is bound to the Signet of the Ether anyway. We have the Signet of the Ether on a 25-second cooldown, effectively with alacrity, and our focus 5 has a shorter cooldown. So delaying the focus 5 by a little bit is not an issue here. I've done a video where I explained this concept of time reserves for Power Chronomancer, and this is basically the same thing going on here. So that's the reason why we can safely prioritize our dagger 2 over our focus 5 here. So we go dagger 2 into focus 5, into F1, and we follow up with 4 more auto attacks, then a dagger 3, a dagger 2, and our weapon swap is ready again. And as you can see, now there's quite some distance already between the dagger 3 and the sword 5, and this distance will grow and grow until at the end we get an extra dagger 3 into the golem, which is all we really wanted to do with it. So, sword 5. Now something tricky is going on. I can stow this sword 5 as I can stow all the other ones, but the next skill we want to use is our F2. And as you can see, we've started the sword 5 cast already, but our F2 is not ready yet. So what can go really wrong here is that we spam F2 while stowing the sword 5 after cast. But if our F2 is not ready, our character will just not do anything. It will just quit its job. And this happened sometimes to me when I was particularly fast, which makes this still risky. Here in this golem attempt, I still go for it, because I see 0.5 seconds that's going to work. Sometimes when it's on 1 second cooldown, I just don't risk it. You'll see that at a later point in this benchmark where I just don't have the guts to stow it. So sword 5 into F2. Again, it's a stowed sword 5. You can see this, that right now we don't have any stacks of Fencer's Finesse in our buff bar, and it's only going to stack up to 9 stacks of Fencer's Finesse. This is a sign that we've stowed the physical hit. Some more auto attacks. And this is quite difficult to do. You need to do 3 auto attacks, F1, just trust that the blades will appear. Then you need to dagger 2 and immediately F4, also just trust that the blades will be here. So this takes a lot of practice to really trust yourself that blades are coming. Don't worry about it. So F4, and after some more attacks, we go dagger 3 into dagger 2 into f1. As you can see, the distance is considerable already. And now sword 5. And this sword 5 can again be cancelled just by swapping early enough. And now there's the thing, because of all the stowing that's going on, our focus 5 was actually not ready here. So this can be a disaster if you sword 5, weapon swap and spam click 5, because then your character is just going to AFK for a moment, because it doesn't like it. So what I do instead here is I sword 5, weapon swap, and then spam click the 1 skill to make 1 dagger auto attack here. And then I press 5. And after this, our dagger 2 is coming up. And then our f2. And our elite was ready again. I wasted 1 second on it, but it turned out for me to be mechanically too difficult to perfectly press the elite off cooldown while also not messing up the important parts of the rotation. But this costs me some damage at the end of the golem, because I think the elite doesn't completely tick to completion. Yeah, but I had to pick my poison in this case. F1, and now comes the skipped Signet of Illusions. And while on the sword set here, I don't think I stowed this one. I will use our F1 and I will use the F4 again to put them on maximum cooldown. Oh no, I didn't stow the sword 5 because we can see 10 hits of the Fence's Finesse buff. Sometimes stowing the sword 5 is hard if you don't have a literal skill to Q into. If it's just an auto attack to Q into, it's a bit... That's why sometimes I didn't go for it. Okay, and after our F4, we get 5 blades again. We use our dagger 3 here to gain some time to get the 5th blade, and then we go F2. And after the F2, we have nothing going on, so we use our Signet of Illusions for a perfect reset. Now, I've said it earlier before, our F1 is going to tick up to full charges. If it wouldn't cost us blades, it would be great to use our F1 here, even though it's just 2 blades. But it also pushes back the F2 further because it's going to reset our blade count. So I really we just let it happen that this skill max out on cooldown, on charges, and we lose some damage. Sword 5, dagger, weapon swap, dagger 2, F2. And after this, I know I need 4 auto attacks to generate the 5 blades for our F1. So we auto attack 4 times, and then F1. Even though it's at 4 blades, I know the 5th blade is coming. And then it starts becoming a bit freestyle, because getting here is very difficult to play perfectly, like to not have any extra auto attacks. And if you have extra auto attacks inside of this, the cooldowns will not be that way. And to be honest, I didn't always get into this situation with that kind of cooldowns. So from here on, it's not as planned, and as a result, I actually lose some major time during this last part, because I cancel some auto attacks because I don't know how many I need between skills, so sometimes I misjudge it. Still, I got a very high DPS number, but what I'm saying is it could be even higher if I could play and practice this part of the rotation perfectly as well. So if I mapped out every auto attack here, and if I could rely on the cooldowns to align exactly as planned. But until here it was perfect as I intended it, but from here on we will see some cancelled auto attacks. With 5 blades, we actually don't shatter here, even though the F1 is like, it's saying shatter, shatter, please. But we actually wait for this dagger 3 and then go into the F4. Because during the F4 we can't shatter anything. If we use F4 now, before the dagger 3, this wastes about 2 seconds on the cooldown of our dagger 3 because it's going to come up during the f4. So we wait for the dagger 3 and then f4. And we use f4 here and nothing else is ready. This is perfect. We want our f4 channel time, which is quite bad. We only wanted to replace auto attacks, and we don't want it to replace other skill uses. It's not that great. Our dagger 2 is then followed by an f1. We weapon swap. Here again, there could be a stow going on. We could stow into our dagger 1. I think at that point I was just too nervous to do it, because if I stow now, for example, I've just fully cancelled the attack and I ruined the attempt. And I saw I have a lot of DPS going. I do not dare to stow this one for a minimal gain. So here I get a physical hit. We see I have 1 stack of Fancy's Finesse and I get 9 more from the Phantasm. And here I make a slight mistake. I use my F1 instead of waiting for my F2. The reason for that is now I don't have 5 blades to press the F2 perfectly. The F1 can always wait because it's an ammo skill. But our F2 cannot wait, and now we waste like 2 seconds on the F2, which means the final F2 will tick 2 times less. It wastes some amount of damage here. That's the thing about Virtuoso. Whatever you do, it only matters 10 or 15 seconds down the line, and this is also true about this benchmark, and it's going to be true about your performance in boss fights. Now this rotation is geared for optimizing our golem DPS, but and that may seem arbitrary. It is arbitrary, of course, but I hopefully am able to show how to adapt to a particular boss fight by showing you how I adapted to the golem. So you can do the adaptation for each boss fight as needed. Our dagger 3 used perfectly here. As you can see now, the difference is 5 seconds between the 2 skills, and this will result in an extra dagger 3 at the end. We use our F3 here again because if I didn't use it here, I would have to use it soon enough, and I thought it's better to use it here and just be done with it. And now I can, for the last 20%, I focus on hitting our big damage skills again. Our F4 will be ready again, but the channel time of the F4 unfortunately never aligns as well as it should to make sense to use, because it would always lead to one of the skills being delayed and either a shatter or a weapon skill. So unfortunately we can't use it anymore. If we could use it another time in the benchmark, that would be a considerable DPS gain. I show you one moment where we can use it, and I explain why we don't. And now sword 5. This is a accidental physical hit. I didn't want this physical hit, but sometimes I don't weapon swap perfectly. What's important here is the golem is going to die in about 15 seconds. And now is the time to think about which skills can I still get in, how much value do I get out of them. And our bleedings all hold for exactly 10 seconds. And our Phantasm, unfortunately, it takes about 5 seconds to do its attack. It's a very slow Phantasm. So I need to use it here, absolutely here. So I go Signet of the Ether, Focus 5. Here it's very strict in the use, because we're not talking about time reserves anymore. I do not have time. I need to use it now. So unfortunately, I can't use it now because Deadly Blades is gone. Like, we don't have the 5% buff. I need to restore that one first. So I do that with our F1 and then Phantasm. And it's not getting all its hits through now. Not all of the bleeding will tick forever until the end of the fight, but that's unavoidable. And now with 10 seconds to go, it's just the best idea to just use all the skills you have. I'm cancelling some auto attacks here. It's not ideal, but I think it would be a mistake to also wait. Because our Dagger 2, for example, it does 3 bleeding stacks now, which can complete, but it's the returning blades will also cause 3 bleeding stacks, and they already don't fully tick anymore. So I just spam the button. And the same happens for our F1 and F2. I don't care at that point that our F2 will be ever so slightly delayed for it. It would be a bigger mistake to wait for the F2 first and then go into F1. So I go F1 now. And the other problem is, you see the F4 is coming up now, but there's no way we get it in. We just patiently wait until our F2 is at 5 blades. Our Elite is ready, it won't fully tick again, but we use it. Then Dagger 2 one last time, and then another Sword 5. And this time I just go for it. I stowed the physical hit, and I stowed it into a Dagger 1, just to get the maximum amount of damage out on this last stretch. The Phantasm will not even complete its attack, but it's still better than auto-attacking. Most of the skills are better than auto-attacking if you have 2 seconds left, so just from the time they take to do their damage. And I use my F1, which is immediately better than auto-attacking. It does a lot of direct strike damage. And then I go Dagger 2 into Dagger 3. And this is the final Dagger 3, which we've been working towards, and it does its job. And of course, it's not just that we've got an extra Dagger 3 out of prioritizing it all the time over the Sword 5 at the start. It's not just that, it's also like the previous Dagger 3 got to fully tick still. It was 10 seconds ago, so it did its full damage. So here, at the very end, we have the payoff of something I did 90 seconds ago. And I think this shows you the level of optimization and thought that can be put into this rotation. And obviously you don't need to do that, right? You can go into a raid and you can remember to use your Sword 5 2 times. You can weapon swap, you can focus 5, Signal of the Ether, focus 5. You can do these kinds of things, and you will get respectable damage. You can also do it on the Golem, and you will get 90% of the benchmark. You will maybe even get 95% of the benchmark just by following these basic priorities. Where it gets difficult and really challenging is when you try to optimize the damage. If you greed for every little bit of DPS, then you need to think about the rotation, and you need to think about it more than on many other classes. Because if a class has 2 different weapon sets, you have a set amount of skills you use on one set, then you weapon swap, and you use a set amount of skills on the other weapon set. And these just alternate, they will form a loop, because weapon cooldowns are going to be ready on the next set again, so you will always have the weapon skills already, and it just repeats all the time. But Condition Virtuoso does not loop. And of course, we can talk about the sword loop and the focus loop, but Dagger 2, Dagger 3 and our blade songs, they just never repeat. And they have different cooldowns. That means their cooldowns change. And when 2 skills come up at the same time, you need to think about which one to prioritize. You could obviously go by prioritizing by just considering which one does more damage per cast time, maybe. But what you really need to think about is how often can you use the skill, depending on the skill order you choose. And This is why our F1 uses at the very start. You remember one of the last skills I pressed was an F1. And this extra F1 did a lot of strike damage again. And it also got to tick for 1 more second of bleeding. So there is a payoff down the line for doing things at the very start. And these things affect the skill priority, in my opinion. And whenever someone asks about skill priority for Condition Virtuoso, I say it's complicated. Of course, we could make a priority list to give you a rough idea what's important to press and what isn't important to press. Like your F3 and your F4 are not that important, and your F1 and F2 are very important. But the priority list is not, if that's the priority list, that's then not necessarily what I'm going to do on the golem with it, or what I'm going to do in a raid with it. Because I will prioritize different skills depending on external circumstances, so to speak, right? Because if the boss is about to phase, I will not cast a Sword 5 or a Focus 5, for example, because they take a lot of time. So the priority list can rapidly change depending on the situation. That's why there's no priority list listed on the Snowcrow site. There's the opener, and I'll leave it at that. And I will also provide the basic idea with 2 phantasms on each weapon set. So more of the basic concepts I've outlined earlier. But it must be clear to you that just with the basic concepts, you will never get to 38,000 DPS. Okay, I've been talking enough about this rotation already. I hope you enjoyed this very in-depth version of Condition Virtuoso, and I wish you a wonderful day.